Let me show you how to make it. Hello everybody, welcome back to the studio. I designed this wallet just over a year ago. This is going to be the whole styling I was going to go forward with in 2023, which is this year. I decided to not go with that and redesign the whole product catalog again. So I've released 4 wallet patterns. They're all on the website in this style with these little cutaways and the wraps. They're fun little wallets. I'm going to walk you through actually how I make this. Because of this wrap, we do need to consider the thickness of the leather we're using because that impacts where these pockets line up. Let's get into it. Okay, so getting into this, make sure your pattern has printed to scale. So check the little reference box at the bottom, make sure it's the right size. If it's off by a millimeter, it shouldn't make that big of a difference. I know a lot of printers though will print slightly off. For me personally, I actually have to upscale mine to 101%. For some reason, my printer just prints it lower. I'm not sure why, but that's what I have to do. So make sure you check that scaling to make sure everything's actually going to work out properly once you start cutting into the leather. If you are going to be working with a printed leather like I am in this video, I suggest you actually take the time and cut out the window of that exterior piece. So you can see here, I'm lining everything up and I'm just cutting along those dotted lines. What I'm going to do next, you'll see a cut along the top of each pocket, and this pops out that piece and keeps the rest of the paper intact. So I have a little window into where my pattern is going to be aligned on my leather. So you can see here I'm carefully cutting around that interior piece so that I can see what's going to be removed from the pattern. So if I want to keep a specific section, I know what's going to end up being cut out. And then once it's all done, there we go. You can see that negative of the actual pattern. And then I'll just cut that out, put that aside. And then next, I'm going to show you how to use that so you can get your pattern perfectly aligned. So right here, I'm working with this beautiful natural cashmere leather that I got from a leather store. Very cool leather, very cool print. It's really fun to work with this, especially trying to get that piece lined up exactly where it is. There's so many different options that you can do on here when lining up the pattern. And I was quite surprised how well this actual pattern works on this leather. There's a lot of different areas where it really wraps around nicely. Very cool leather. If you haven't checked out some of these embossed leathers, I encourage you to do so. They're a lot of fun, especially ones with fun little patterns like this. So you can see here, I'm just moving the piece around, rotating it. So I'm getting different angles, different views, trying to figure out what I really like. You can see I highlight a few things here. And I'm just keeping note of which patterns I really like. And then eventually I'm going to land on one and I'll trace out the actual template with my proper template piece and not this window piece. So there I've selected my pattern. I put in the actual piece itself. I prefer tracing on the proper piece versus the window negative because that negative, you find it is a little bit flimsier for some reason. Maybe it's just how I cut this one, but I always prefer to use the actual piece when marking out the lines on my leather. And then after that, it's just a matter of cutting out the pieces. On this printed leather, you do have to be careful because that pattern can actually pull the knife. So I'm going very slow when I'm cutting out, especially on these curves, to make sure that my knife doesn't end up wavering into the pattern itself. If you're not working with an embossed leather, obviously it's not that big of a deal. You just cut as normal, whether you use a hobby blade like this, or you're gonna end up using a skiving knife. Take your time, make sure it's accurate. Now you can see here, I am using my hobby blade with my ruler. Now normally when I do straight cuts, I like using my skiving knife, but because this line is hard to see, I prefer a ruler that I can register that blade against and then cut the leather so it ensures that it's perfectly straight. And then I trace the 2 interior pieces onto this brown Marima leather. And you can see here, I'm actually decided to stick with a knife, stick with the ruler, cut all those straight lines, and then the corners here, I just sharpen up my skiving knife and then nip off those corners because such short little cuts are a real pain in the butt to do with the ruler. and just a skiving knife is far faster to get these corners nipped off. Once we have our 3 pieces cut out, the 2 interior pieces, you're going to finish the top pocket of those first, and then same with our exterior piece, we're going to finish the top 2 pockets and that rounded corner right in the middle. So then once I have that sanded down, I'm going to come through with a nice sharp beveler, bevel over all those portions that I've already sanded down, because I won't be able to do those later. So gluing these pieces up is fairly straightforward. We're just going to add glue to the sides and the bottom. Make sure you account for the trim allowance here to add enough glue to the sides. You'll see here I've just done a nice thin layer, forgetting that I actually have trim allowance because I don't actually normally use trim allowance on my main line of products. So there I just add a second little bead just to make sure I'm going to get full glue coverage and my side isn't going to come undone. So once that glue is set up, I'm going to grab my positioning square, align those pieces in. Let's just make sure that everything is going to line up properly. But again, I mentioned it in the last video, I don't actually rely on this 100%. I just use it for that first little alignment. Just lightly touch down along the edge and then lift it up. Make sure everything's actually aligned perfectly. And then I'll come through and then finish this bottom edge. So you can see here, I finished off that edge. It's got a nice polish. Now I'm going to line up the exterior piece with the interior piece. So this is where you can no longer follow the template, and you'll see here. So I'm gonna clip on the template to my leather piece so that you can see what happens and the impact that the thickness of your leather has on the final position of that exterior piece. So you can already see there that I'm about 1.5 mil short of where my template says the top of my pocket should be. Now I've tried to get this thing as accurate as possible, but I then realized that depending on the thickness of that interior piece, it's going to change. So what you're going to do is wrap it around like I have here. You can clip it in place to make sure that it doesn't move. Check to make sure both sides line up perfectly. Once you're happy with that, take your awl, mark the top of the pocket, mark the bottom on all sides. That's going to give you your start and stop point for your glue, and that's going to make sure that everything lines up perfectly. So one thing I'm doing here is actually I'm just going to mark where my stitch line is going to be so that I know I add enough glue and I rough up enough area. I didn't do that when I glued the interior, but I learned my lesson this time, so I'm actually going to mark that area, rough up that whole section, add glue there, and that's going to ensure I have proper glue coverage once I cut off that trim allowance. That's a little leather rougher that I really like using. I'll link to that in the description below if you want to pick one up for yourself. It's super handy to just, you can see, quickly rough up that leather in preparation for gluing. You can just use sandpaper. You don't need a dedicated tool, but you can see it's just one swipe and the leather's roughed up, ready to go. Nice and convenient, super easy, and the tool's only like 20 bucks. So I just add a nice little light layer of glue, wait for it to tack up, and get these pieces stuck together. So one note of this, I am only gluing one side at a time. So I'm lining up that exterior piece exactly with my marks on the interior piece. I'm gonna let that set up for 5-10 minutes, let that glue really take hold, and then I'll add glue to the other side and get the other side glued down. I prefer doing this rather than trying to glue it all at once. It's just not worth trying to fuss with two sides with glue on it, and then you can't lie it down anywhere because it's got glue on both sides. Trust me, do one side at a time. So that's the piece all glued up. Now we can mark our trim allowance and cut off the excess. One thing to note here, you can add your stitch line and punches now if you want to do it before trimming off your trim allowance. Some people prefer to do that because when you punch through, sometimes it can deform the exterior edge depending on how close you are. Now I'm 4 mil from the edge, so I don't really have to worry about that. But if you're doing 3 mil, 2.5 mil from the edge, you may want to run your stitch line now, punch through, then trim off the allowance afterwards. That can end up leading to a cleaner edge if you take off the trim allowance after you've punched your stitching holes. So here I'm just adding my stitch allowance, 4 mil in from the edge, and then I'm just going to hang that first tooth over the top of the pocket and then just punch down. I'm actually going to go punch right through on this and then just work my way down. If that last tooth didn't overhang the bottom of the pocket perfectly, then I would just hit that last punch and then come in with my single tooth iron and add that hole right at the end. One thing I'm going to do here is just do a light tap to set the spacing all the way down. And then what I'm going to do is flip the wallet around so that I'm punching with the edge of the leather on my right hand side. For some reason, I find that when I do this the opposite way, my iron ends up leaning way too far to the edge. I'm not sure, I still haven't been able to figure out why. I'm just far more comfortable when the edge of the leather is always on my right hand side. Don't forget, hammer down those thread holes to close them up just a little bit. I personally find this leads to a neater stitch. So a little heads up on this video and future videos, I have a whole video on edge finishing. So I'm probably going to skip over most of the edge finishing process in the videos in order to save time. You don't have to watch it. If you want to see exactly how I do, you can check the video maybe here. I think it's on this side of that playlist of my entire edge finishing process, tools, tips, tricks, all that stuff. Go watch that if you want to see exactly how I do this. Same with the stitching. I'm going to be releasing a single video on how I stitch. So I'm going to be skipping that in these videos. So if you want to see those, go check those previous ones. I am going to make a quick note here because I didn't go into detail in my series about adding wax. So I'm going to show you that here. And I just want to show you first what the edge looks like with just Tokonole. So you can see here that edge is perfectly clean. That is a respectable edge. You could easily send this wallet out to a paying customer and be perfectly happy with it. But if you want to take that edge to the next level and add just a bit more protection as well, then go ahead and add some wax. Here's how I add the wax. So I use my electric creaser, heat it up to about 3. Your setting may be different. And then I'm also using, Columbus wax as my edge finishing. So I have the iron heated just enough so it just melts enough wax by touching it. So you'll have to get that and play around with it to see what setting works. But once you find it, it melts super quick, super evenly, and it doesn't burn the wax, which is the most important. If it's too hot, it's going to burn it. So just get a bit of wax on that spatula, rub it in, and if you get it right with the light, you can see the wax spreading onto the surface, and you can see where it's not smooth. So keep spreading it out until it looks like a nice clean flat layer. And then I like using a heavier canvas to polish up and smooth out that still warm wax. And then I'm going to come through, I always do this, come through at the end with a nail file polisher, the finest grit it has, and polish up that edge. Now actually you can see here, this is prior to buffing. That's just with that heavy canvas cloth, and you can see the difference. There's a much more noticeable shine there, and it adds a really nice layer of protection to that edge, so it maintains over time. And then you can see here, I come in with that nail file. That yellow one is the highest grit that I have. I'm not sure what it is. It's super, super, super high. It's probably like 10,000. It's ridiculous. But I find it actually makes a huge difference on this wax. Really polishes it up nicely. You can see that nice buffed edge. There we go. That's it. Well, it's done. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to get these plans for yourself, head over to my website, norfolkhandmade.com. And if you want to see what I've got going on a daily basis, head over to my Instagram account, norfolk.handmade. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next one.